I think I've said a number of times, Guerrilla Talks is a casual series of talks with artists, collectors, and architects, and interior designers who are also collectors and artists and so on. William fits all of these descriptions, which makes him a very interesting guest. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
William, I'll give a very little sort of introduction. William Lim is all of those things, but from Hong Kong, now based in Hong Kong, but you've spent some time overseas. Your main activity is as an architect, would you say?
Definitely an architect first.
You have to hold
that
it.
Makes my living.
Okay. And are you based? I know you're technically based in Hong Kong, but you spend a lot of time between Hong Kong and China, Beijing. Is that how much time do you spend here?
Actually, now I spend about 2/3 of the time in Hong Kong, and then the rest is really between work and family obligations, and also art, which is becoming more and more part of my life.
Right. I'm going to ask you about that in a second. I'm going to go backwards instead. I know you spent some time in Boston and the States. How long were you there altogether?
I spent about 12 years in the States altogether. Yeah, I went there for college. I went to architecture school. And after that, I lived in Boston for 6 years.
Right. That's a large chunk of your life. It's not strange, though, in Hong Kong to go away and move back for people who are studying and for professional life. And I think the other way as well. A lot of people, such as myself, also come here. What have you brought back to Hong Kong, do you think, from that experience?
Oh, actually, that was a long time ago. But I think basically the time spent in the States was really like kind of a growing up thing, and also exposing me to a lot of different culture, especially in terms of art. I think I always feel that Hong Kong has been very sheltered from art until, like, I would say, like maybe in the last 5 years or so. But before that, it's never really considered as part of a necessity, and it's really also, it's never really a part of education. What we learn from art during like schooling in Hong Kong is very limited. So when I went to the States, that's when I really start visiting museums and realizing that how it can actually be a part of our life, art itself.
Is that where, I know that you also do artworks yourself, is that where your practice comes from your time in the States?
Actually, I've always done art, especially as growing up in Hong Kong. That's one thing that I'm very interested in. But actually, with the, kind of graduating from university and having to make a living, then the art really took on kind of a backseat for many, many years, until maybe about 10 years ago when I start to get more involved back with some architectural works that people started to look at them more as art installations.
So they were looking at your architecture as art installations?
Right. Yeah.
How is that? Could you explain a little bit about what they were, like, formally?
Well, in 2003, there was a competition to design for the Mid-Autumn Festival, kind of an installation at Victoria Park. It was hosted by the Hong Kong Institute of Architects. So, it was actually inviting architects to participate. And when I entered for that, I really had the intention that I'm building a building, but although it's temporary, it's a building.
Right.
But then I used a lot of bamboo material to build it. And at the end, when the whole thing was over, then I started to be invited to give talks on these public art forum. So obviously people view it more as public art than architecture, and then one thing led to another, and I started doing a lot more in that area.
Wow. And do you work in other mediums? I think I've seen photography work of yours as well.
Yeah, actually, I like to work in different medium. I don't find myself being confined to one medium, and in a way, like for me, bamboo it's I've worked with it for a long time, and I almost feel that it's time for me to move on to something else. So I also do painting, which I always feel is one of the most challenging thing for artists nowadays.
Right. Why is that? Personally, what's challenging about painting for you?
Basically, it's just that so much has been done, and I think it's very. I know that art nowadays it's really almost all art is a form of derivative, but still, in terms of painting, there's so much that's been done and so much to derive from that it becomes a very difficult medium to do something that's interesting, that's something that is also personal. I think it's difficult.
Right. And what materials do you paint with? In Hong Kong, there's a big question. There's a huge ink, kind of modern ink tradition here as well. Is that something that you're engaged with, or is it not really?
No, actually, ink is not my forte. Actually, I do a lot with acrylic, which is, I think, probably environmentally more friendly than using oil. And also, it's a much faster medium. So I think for a place like Hong Kong, it actually makes a lot of sense.
Right.
And also, actually, a lot of Hong Kong artists, I think, are using very alternative medium, kind of like with ballpoint pen and with other felt tip and whatever. So I think for me also I like to draw with those kind of medium. To me I feel it's very much suiting to the kind of fast-paced lifestyle of Hong Kong.
I'm interested in how the way that you've taken on more artwork, and you've said that in the last 10 years, I guess, you've been working more on that. Has that affected the type of architectural, like the actual buildings that you're building? Has that had some influence the other way?
I think gradually. I think it has starting to take on a more of a knock-on effect. It's not so much intentionally changing my design to suit kind of the artistic side, but it's more like clients are starting to accept the kind of person I am, and in a way some clients are actually interested in that cross between art and architecture, and
Right.
in a way because of that I'm given more freedom to kind of do my own design.
Could you describe a project where that's happened, for example?
I was a more recent project from about a year or so ago. We did the East Hotel for the Swire Group. It was in Kowloon. It's actually in the east side of the Hong Kong island, and at the time we kind of wanted to incorporate art into the project, but not in a very application way. It's kind of like building it into the architectural space. So we're very fortunate that we get to work with a few artists to carry that out, and also for myself, some parts of the design is also get to be quite artistic in a way, like more like
Right.
art installation. Like we can do very kind of deconstructive type of staircase, and then we can do
Right.
very minimal type of architecture. So it does allow us to be a lot more creative in terms of doing architecture.
Right. I mean, I know that there's also artists working elsewhere who are kind of known as conceptual artists who have been very interested in creating architecturally styled spaces, of course. So that seems to make a lot of sense, and responding to a city like Hong Kong, where the whole notion of construction, reconstruction seems to be part of the atmosphere. Just to put that aside for a second, on top of those activities, you're also a collector. You're also known as somebody who engages on that level with a collection of art. Can you tell us how that came about? I mean, was that something that's also started a long time ago, or has that been recent?
I've always been interested in art, but as far as a collector, it really hasn't been so long. But I started when I travel. I like to look at art, and sometimes you pick up a piece here and there. But then I think it maybe like 4 or 5 years ago is when I started to realize that in a way, especially contemporary art is very relevant to our life, and it's something that in almost record the time that we're living in. And also at the time, Hong Kong artists really, nobody pays attention to them. There was no commercial value, no market for it, and in a way I kind of felt that they really needed support, and they need people to tell them that you're doing well, and the way that you support them is really to collect their work, and that's when I started looking into, especially collecting Hong Kong artists' work.
I think that's really interesting that you see collection as a kind of a mission. A lot of young Hong Kong artists are working in conceptual forms as well as obviously painting, installation, things like that. Are you collecting or supporting many different ranges of materials or outcomes? What kind of things have you been interested in?
Right. Well, I think as a collector or like anything else, you probably start with the easy ones, and then you eventually move to the next level. So for me, I started more with two-dimensional work with paintings, obviously, and it's easier to appreciate. It's easier to hang on the wall. You know, it's really not so much of a challenge. But then as we progress, and especially like you're saying, a lot of Hong Kong artists are really into a lot more conceptual work, which I find them to be fascinating. And you know, I've kind of like collected a few works that really challenges the collector. You know, one being like a bonsai that I have to take care of.
And a bonsai? Whose work is that? I have a bonsai.
It's actually...
I'm not sure if I'm collecting their work or not.
It's actually a Shen Xiaoming's work.
Right.
Yeah, which is... it kind of... He used a bonsai, but then he kind of had this kind of armature of metal structure around it, kind of making a comment on kind of, you know, nature and the bondage that we put in nature. Very easy concept to understand. I always think that good art shouldn't need a lot of explaining. So that was one thing I collected a few years back.
So that's, I mean, you mentioned Shen Xiaoming. I know he's an artist who's also obviously spent time in Australia and now based in China. Does your work, which takes you to China a lot, does that also influence the type of work that you're engaging with and collecting? Are you finding yourself also supporting the sort of the scene in places like Beijing or Shanghai?
At the beginning, when there was really less galleries in China, and then there were less things to do when you go visit.
When's the beginning? When would you say that is?
That's probably even in the early 2000s. You know, I think people didn't get focusing on Chinese contemporary that much back then. So, and of course, China was also a quieter place. You know, so you know, at night or in the evening, some galleries are open till later. I remember Shanghai when they were back in the People's Park, and they used to open till like maybe 10 in the evening. So there's nothing else to do. That's the only place you go hang around, and you can talk to the gallerists and you can talk to the artists. So it was kind of nice until, you know, the whole scene changed and it got so crazy and all that. But I felt that, again, to me, the interest in Chinese artists compared to like local Hong Kong is quite different. I kind of feel more of a commonality with the Hong Kong artists and their mentality, and in a way, it to me, it's kind of more. I can identify more with what they're doing.
So that, in that sense, I guess you've said that it's a record of our lives, and you're looking for that in your collecting in the same way that you might in your work. This sense of identity, and that's also part of your collecting.
Yeah, I think as a collector, in a way, it's kind of interesting. It's more makes it more interesting when you have a certain focus, and it really. Once you have that, it doesn't really have to do with the kind of budget you have. You know, people have amazing collection of matchboxes or you know, like rubber stamps or erasers and things like. So in a way, I think once you have a focus, it makes the collection more interesting, and that's really the kind of thing that I feel I'm interested in. So now with, let's say, with some of the things I'm collecting, it might not make much sense in terms of it's not something you put on the wall, but it's something that could relate to other things that I'm interested in, may even be related to the profession I'm in, and also, like, you know, like when they're together, it starts to make certain dialogues between the different pieces of work, and that's really what interests me now.
How, when you said when they're together, I know you must have offices in these different places through your architectural firm. Where is your collection? You know, what do you do with? I mean, it must depend on the pieces that you have, but in general, do you try and put it into your everyday life, or is it?
Yeah, I'm starting to think that art. To me, the interesting ones are the ones that can almost connect to an everyday life. And I never see art as something that you kind of put on a pedestal or something that, you know, you just hang on the wall and observe. I always feel that it's something that should connect with life. A lot of Hong Kong artists actually do works that you can, you know, people like Lee Kid, that he does tablecloth that you can actually use, or, you know, people like Nadim, you know, the work becomes very much an everyday object. And to me, those are very interesting. And with that kind of work, I can use it as a coffee stand. I can use it as, you know.
Do they know that?
I don't know if they know that, but to me, I like to have art that kind of surround me, not necessarily in a display order. Sometimes they could be just stacked up somewhere.
It's kind of camouflaged.
Yes, yeah, and I think that's the nature of things. If you find that stool artistic, then it becomes art. I think that's part of what life is about.
Right. You've taken on more of a role supporting artists, as you've just explained. Are you also looking at institutions? I mean, once you start to make art, build buildings, and support artists' work, it seems to point in a direction of taking a greater sort of role in the institutions of art. Are you involved in even anything like that?
Yeah, I'm involved in a few things.
Can you talk about them?
Well, yeah, I'm involved. I'm the co-chair of Parasite, which is a Hong Kong nonprofit art space, and I just feel that Parasite is doing great work, and in a way, it also needs support because we don't do very conventional exhibitions. It shows that galleries would never do. And I think people need to see this other perspective about art, and that's why I feel that it's very important to support them. I'm also on the board of AAA, Asian Art Archive. Again, they're doing something very unique for Asia. A few years back, I have no idea, what is archival means, but now I really think that it's very important. Again, it's really what we're doing now, but it will influence our future generation when they look back and they have an idea of how we used to live at this time. And also, I think in a place like Hong Kong, maybe there are not enough people that have an interest in contemporary art. So I'm really roped into a lot of other things. I'm the gallery advisor. of the gallery committee for the Asia Society.
Right.
I'm also on the acquisition board for the Asia Pacific acquisition committee for the Tate Modern. So I pretty much I'm wearing many hats, and as many as I can help with, I'm very glad to do that.
That's great. I mean, hearing about Tate makes me think about we're in the Art Hong Kong, which is obviously changing. There's a lot more interest. There's a lot of eyes sort of looking to Hong Kong, I think, for the first time. Walking around the fair, I heard somebody say they haven't been here in 15 years. What do you think is in store for Hong Kong on this type of cultural, artistic level? What do you see happening?
I think it's a great thing happening. I mean, there aren't that many cities in the world that you can have an art fair like this. So I think it's definitely a great thing happening here. It's exposed a lot of for a lot of our local people to be able to really get close in touch with art. I mean, look at this one in front of us. How often can you walk on top of a piece of artwork without people like telling you to get off? So
It's
I think
referencing Shen Xiaomin's work.
the
just
Shen
over there, yeah.
Xiaomin's work, yeah. So I think it's a great opportunity, and together with like West Kowloon happening, I hope the two will balance each other off. I mean, one is definitely commercial, one is hopefully definitely institutional, and I think the two can play off and complement each other. I think being lopsided in one way or another might not be the ideal situation. When you're too commercial, I think it really totally destroys the meaning of art. But then if you're too institutional or too much of a difficult to understand thing, it really intimidates a lot of people. So I think the two together, it really would cultivate Hong Kong into a very different place. It's something that it doesn't exist before, and hopefully it's something that is going to start happening and happen in a big way.
Right. Do you think there's the infrastructure for that to happen now? Like, is it going to be a big leap, or is the groundwork pretty much done?
I always think that doing cultural things, it's really the hardware, the infrastructure is not the difficult part. It's really the software, it's the programming, it's the people, it's the general education that is really the important part. And I really feel that for Hong Kong, the hardware is totally not a problem, and it's definitely on its way. But I think there's a need to really start maybe even from education of how do we, if the drive is to really make Hong Kong a cultural and art place, like the fact that we're going to have a Ministry of Culture, then it's not something that you just install a position and start from that level, but it's something that it might take 10 years, 20 years to bring up the next generation to be really, aware of art. You don't have to like it. You don't have to, not everyone should like it, but I think it would be good to have a general basic knowledge of what it is. Then people can decipher whether this is something that is important to their life or not. Give them another choice. I think that's the important part.
Right. I think that's probably a good place to leave for today. The conversation can and probably will continue. But thank you very much for joining us. This is William Lim. This is actually going to be our last Guerrilla Talk today. So if you didn't hear what I said before, we were supposed to have Yan Peiming, another artist who is based in France, Chinese artist, very well-known oil painter. He couldn't make it from Shanghai today, so he is going to be here tomorrow afternoon. If you're interested, please do come back for his talk or earlier. Guerrilla Talks will continue tomorrow and Sunday between 1 and around 4:30. So please join us again.
Thanks.
Thanks.
you.